school days were altered quite a bit. We had to have siren drill. We always had to carry our gas mask with us wherever we went. We had to take them to school, and we'd have drills where the bell would ring and you'd have to put your gas masks on and then troop down to the air raid shelters in the field. It was just literally a long corridor, sort of arch-shaped. You had benches either side, and at the end there was a portable toilet, a galvanised bucket, which if you wanted to go to the loo, you had to use this, and being a bucket you could hear what was going on, and it was all very embarrassing. But the fact that we were in the shelter, we still had to say our times table, and we learnt it in a singy-songy fashion. So we used to sing our times tables, and then we used to have the mental arithmetic. We were well occupied. I mean, the teachers used to take books down as well, and they used to read us stories. Mostly the teachers were female, of course, because a lot of the male teachers had left to go into the forces. A nice part of school time then was very often you only went half day, you didn't go full day, because some of the teachers weren't always able to get to school. Something had happened during the night, perhaps the buses weren't running or there'd been a bomb drop. One week we went full time, and then another time perhaps we just went in the mornings and afternoons the following week.
Well, I used to go to the News Theatre at Castle Street, which used to have a Saturday morning children's show, which was, I think, threepence or sixpence to get in. And the awful thing about this cinema was that once it was filled up with hundreds of us screaming kids, you'd hear this terrible voice of the usherette shouting out, "Two to a seat." You knew then that there was still a load of kids outside waiting to come in. And you paid money for your seat, and you had to sort of crunch your whole body up to allow somebody else to sit by you, not a person of your choice. So you could be sat next to anybody who kept chewing something or other, making a dreadful noise. And it was the awful feeling. So when they said two to a seat, you sort of tried to swell your whole body out to show that there was no way you could move up in your seat. But the cinema I used to love, because that was always cartoons, maybe a Laurel and Hardy comedy or the Three Stooges, and invariably it ended with a Western cowboy serial.
When the war started, there were 8 of us, my mother and father, and 6 children. My father was a cinema organist, and we used to help my father assemble the organ, really, because he put a third manual onto it, because he understood all the workings as well. And he also made 2 plywood sides so that it looked larger. At the Luxor, there was no lift, and my brother and I had to put it onto the stage on one side. He used to push the organ out while we brought the sides out and put them alongside. When my father would play along with a record, my brother would have to put the needle on a part that had been marked so that it came in with my father playing, accompanying Anne Shelton and people like that. He'd do a different sort of theme each week. He made all his own slides, which came up on the screen. Sometimes people could join in. He'd put the words of the song so they could all join in.
On Thursday, June the 3rd, the following announcement was issued. The British Overseas Airways Corporation regrets to announce that a civil aircraft on passage between Lisbon and the United Kingdom is overdue and must be presumed lost. The last message received from the aircraft stated that it was being attacked by an enemy aircraft. The aircraft carried 13 passengers and a crew of 4. Next of kin have been informed. Later it was announced that among the passengers was Leslie Howard. And now a personal tribute by J.B. Priestley.
I was his colleague very often in overseas broadcasts. In fact, the first one he ever did was with me nearly 3 years ago. And I know how well he succeeded in conveying to enormous distant audiences the same easy charm and quiet sincerity that marked his performances on the stage and screen.
And from that full-throated chorus that makes the rafters ring here at the Hans Crescent American Red Cross Club in London, you will have no difficulty in deciding that our Christmas party for our American allies is on the beam. Under the colorful decorations of the cross flags of the United Nations, we've got fighting men from every state in the Union, hardy lumberjacks from Oregon, men from cattle ranges of Texas, farmers from the great wheat country in the Middle West, young businessmen from the great business centers of the East and the West Coast. Soldiers, sailors, and airmen, they are all letting themselves go in a song that their fathers set the world singing in the last war. Over there, this time they've got new words for it. Listen.
Over there, you at home, keep it up, do your share. Just the Christmas spirit, you bet we'll hear it, although we're far from you again.
The first Americans arrived in Bristol, I think, in about 42, 43, and I was one of the original Gotney Gum Chum Brigade. Now, basically, this used to be gangs of kids who'd harass these poor servicemen who we looked on as big giants from Hollywood, California. In fact, they were a most friendly lot and a most generous lot. We used to get lifesavers, which were made out of boiled sweets, Hershey chocolate bars. For the dads, there'd be cartons of Lucky Strike and Chesterfield cigarettes, these marvellous packaging. For mums, there'd be tins of peaches and perhaps some ham or something like this. There used to be a little village hall where they held lots of dances, and I suppose all the local girls used to get there, so the Americans got to hear of this and made a beeline for it. And they used to get off a bus or coach at the top of my road, and they'd all walk down, so you'd suddenly see droves of Americans walking down the road, paired up, and obviously they were going down to this dance hall.
I'm an American reporter sitting here behind a microphone in London. Presumably the only reason for my being here tonight is that I enjoyed the high privilege of seeing Britain in her finest and darkest hour, and have recently returned from a trip of some 17,000 miles around my own country. This is no time for casual platitudes or talk of transatlantic cousinhood. Surely we must all be weary of phrases that have long ago lost their cutting edge. If we now engage in hypocrisy, take refuge behind the false belief that words mean something different on the two sides of the Atlantic, the future will take its revenge, and retribution will not limp. Some of you don't like some of us, and it's mutual. Some of you think we talk big and do little, that we are lacking in reverence and respect for the land that gave us our law, much of our literature, and most of our customs.
I don't remember a single American, but I do remember much later on, we used to get a lot of convoys coming in, and they would go into Ripon Marketplace where they could park, and we had two drivers came up one day, and they said, they'd got some Russian prisoners. And it was a very cold night, and I said, well, bring them up. Quite illegally, no doubt. And they said, would you mind? And I said, not at all. But our own vicarage was by that time full of evacuees. It had 5 bedrooms, and we were full to bursting. We'd put everything away, I remember, so we had to sort of start up again. And about 3 of these quite pathetic Russians, they'd moved about, they'd been with the Germans, they'd been with us, they'd moved from camp to camp, and we fed them, and they were so grateful. We couldn't speak a word with them at all. And I think once or twice we had Italians too, when they were being moved backwards and forwards. We had a very nice neighbour who was the rubbish man, and he went round with his van, and we were all told nobody must give anybody any information at all. Poor old Norman hadn't taken this in, and when an army van drew up beside him and said, "Where's the way to Ripon?" He told them, and he was taken off, and he was shut up for the night, which worried the village terribly, because Norman was a simple soul. Anyhow, he came back the next day, rather shaken. So my daughter of possibly 8 or 10 bicycled off to the nearest post office shop. And when she came back, she said it had been very interesting because she'd met a strange car with people who obviously were not English, because they couldn't talk English, and she thought they were possibly Germans who had come down by parachute, and they asked her the nearest way to Ripon. So to fill in the time, she said, could she see their identity cards? And they produced papers, which she looked at and sort of said, oh yes, but she said she couldn't really read them, and she handed them back. She then told them the way to go, which was the opposite way from Ripon, right onto an open moor. How far they went, I don't know, and whether somebody stopped them eventually and sent them back to Ripon. But we then heard that these were the first Americans who had moved into Ripon, and they couldn't speak a word of English, according to Phoebe.
I want to speak particularly tonight to young people who are 16, 17 or 18 years old. In requiring you to register, the government clearly acknowledges you as responsible persons, able and anxious to do anything you can to prepare yourselves for the future and to help the country in this, the greatest struggle in history. Don't forget to consult your parents when you're thinking about what you might do. They'll be only too glad if you take them into your confidence. You want to help, and we want you to help. With your enthusiasm and energy, harnessed to the national effort, this country will be better equipped to pull through to victory and secure your brighter future.
I had an operation for adenoids and tonsils. My mother took me all the way to Edgware Hospital with my little gas mask slung across my shoulders, and all the windows were all sandbagged, and you could just see a little fraction at the top. And at night, they didn't take us to shelters. We stayed in our beds, and we could see all the searchlights going across the sky and hear the gunfire. But going there and having the operation, I was given this ether and told to blow it away, and I was there for a week. And the doctor said to me, have you ever suffered from ear trouble? So I told a white lie, and I said, no, I haven't, because I knew that if I did, I'd have to stay another week. My mother came and took me away, and off we went. And a week later, that ward was bombed.
You've all heard of Bader, the legless fighter pilot who was shot down in France recently. By all the ordinary laws of human conduct, when he lost both legs, one of them near the hip in a flying accident, he should, had he obeyed those laws, have become virtually a bath chair cripple, the object of pity and the subject even of self-pity. It is here that Bader achieved his first triumph, the triumph of character over disaster, for he found himself metal limbs and became almost an athlete once more. Then he achieved the physically and officially impossible feat of reinstating himself not only as a pilot, but as a pilot of fighting aircraft.
My father was a funeral director. He didn't talk too much about things to us, but of course, knowing what was going on, he did have a supply of cardboard coffins, which were to be used in case there was a big air raid. But we didn't actually have any very severe raids in Sunderland, although he was called upon to help out at a nearby town, South Shields, when they had a heavy raid. He also had in his possession the ashes of 4 Norwegian servicemen who obviously were killed, and he kept the ashes until after the war, and then they were sent to Norway. My father had a shelter made in the cellar. Part of the cellar he had reinforced, and we used that when the air raid sirens went, and it was quite cosy and nice. But part of the cellar, of course, was used to store wood for the coffins, and another part was the part where he did embalming, complete with sink and all the rest of it.
All over the country, boys and girls who are members of our youth organisations are training for service in His Majesty's forces. Cadets of all 5, the Navy League Sea Cadet Corps, the Army Cadet Force, the Air Training Corps, the Girls Training Corps and the Women's Junior Air Corps meet regularly at Poplar in an LCC institute. To give you an idea of what your sons and daughters do when they leave their homes in uniform, our outside broadcasting department are paying them a visit this evening. Gilbert Harding is in the crowded canteen.
Cup of tea and a bun. Quick, please, mate.
Here you are, mind you don't burn your mouth.
Very clear, is it? Looks like a liberator.
No, it couldn't be a liberator. The wing to aspect ratio. I'd say it was a helicopter.
Cup of cocoa with sugar, please.
Got no cocoa, have some coffee, no sugar either. How's your leave it?
Well, you're eavesdropping, and the youngsters of Poplars, they get a quick cup of tea in their canteen in an interval of their instruction night. This big room in an LCAC institute is full of them, and nearly all in uniform. Air Force blue, khaki, navy blue, and the girls as well, in the RAF blue of the WJAC and the navy blue of the GTC. They've all come along to give up their spare time tonight to pre-service training. Maybe your own boy or girl is doing the same thing, and you may have wondered what exactly they did when they went hurrying off to the ATC, Sea Cadets, or GTC. And tonight, whatever he or she may have joined, we can show you what they're up to. This institute in Poplar is unique in that it houses them all.
I joined the Women's Junior Air Corps when I was about 13, I think. We had our little grey uniform, our little grey field service cap with a badge and grey skirts. And it was really the girls' side of the Air Training Corps. And we had to do aircraft recognition, Morse code, meteorology, and endless marching, endless drills and marching. But we had quite a lot of fun. We used to have dances, the Air Training Corps dances, school dances, Home Guard dances. There was a little local cinema which changed the programmes twice a week, and we could go in there for a shilling into the circle. It was about 9pence downstairs. And they also, in the circle, had double seats at the back, which were absolutely lovely as we got a bit older. As I was quite fond of the dances, of course, I was also quite interested in makeup and so on. And I remember being able to buy certain kinds of makeup, particularly Tangy lipstick, which was a sort of a pale orangey colour in the tube, and then it went on to your mouth, a nice sort of pinky shade. And 3 particular kinds of perfume. There was one called Californian Poppy, which was very, very strong. And there was another one called Evening in Paris, which came in a lovely blue bottle with bits of silver on it. And another one, which was called Mischief, which was in a little black bottle, inside a little black top hat. And, of course, at that age, I used to think that was frightfully elegant. And a Christmas present, I remember, had not only the top hat, but a little cupid on the top of it. Nail varnish, you could always get nail varnish. Even had that on at school one day and was very severely told off. We used to manage for things like that, and powder. There was always Pond's powder and vanishing cream and so on.
This is London calling. This afternoon and every Friday afternoon at 17:30 GMT, London is calling British forces in Africa and in the Middle East with a program which we have called Your Cup of Tea. Now, what's the first thing your wife or your mother will say to you when you get home? Wouldn't you like a nice cup of tea? Well, the way things are for the present, you can't have a cup of tea with your wife or your mother, so we thought it would be a good idea for some of your wives and mothers to come and have tea with us and have a chat with you at the same time. Freddie Griswood is host at this party of ours and yours, and Bertha Wilmot is there to pour out and to sing your requests. Billy Mayall's here too, and he'll be playing that piano of his for you, but you'll hear more about that later. Right now, gentlemen, come inside and join the party.
I used to write to airmen, sailors, soldiers. I used to write reams and reams every night when I could. I used to like writing letters. It used to be about 6 or 7 pages each time. So I suppose somebody was glad to receive them. Nearly every day I was getting letters. It was a job to get the letters because my mother was one of these very protective kind, and she used to go downstairs and take the letters and read them and then sort out whether I should have them or not. I used to wake up about every morning about 7 o'clock and nose pressed to the window looking for the postman to get there before my mother.
This is Godfrey Talbot with 8th Army in Tunisia. I'm talking on March the 13th. I think it's true to say that the men of the 8th Army live and keep going on mail from home as much as they do on their rations. Only rations are more plentiful. Letters, and maybe snapshots from home, these, when they come, are bright lights in a dark world. It's an old theme, I know, but until you experience it, you can't imagine what a difference there is in life on the day when you get some mail, and how letters are read till they're learnt off by heart. How a man lying perhaps in his bivvy in the old unfriendly sand, or hereabouts perhaps near some olive trees or foreign palms, or even bedded down for the night in a purple mist of night-scented stock which grows in these waddies as a weed, in some such place, how a man may pull out his wallet and, pulling out the photographs and precious letters in it, become translated to his home for a few minutes, and be not in Medellin, but Maidstone, not Ben Gardan, but Bradford.
I was an inspector, and I used to inspect parts of the wing of the Lancaster. I was inspecting the wing rib. I loved it, just loved it. Plus the fact I got a white coat and all. I felt like a doctor's receptionist or somebody, you know, this white coat had something. I was 18 when I had to come out of the office to go onto the shop floor. And to me, the white coat was something.
This is an historic and, to me, a very important and moving occasion. It represents the fulfillment of a wish and an objective which forward-looking trade unionists have long cherished and worked for. In this first national meeting of women representatives of our century-old union, we take a great step forward on the road of solidarity and democracy to which all our traditions are directed. And in you, women delegates of your fellow workers in the AEU, we greet one of the greatest forces for progress.
I was aware that I was a woman, not a child, and I could go out on my own more. My mother wasn't as strict. From being 14 to being 20, obviously I'd changed. I just knew that there was going to be an end to it and that we would win. It's as though somebody had said, right, you're in this war, you're going to come out all right. And I just knew that everything was going to be all right.
Well, now, it is one of the promenade concert traditions that Sir Henry Wood, talks to the audience before the second part of the program begins. But this year, he's recorded his address. And we are broadcasting this address now in such a way that it will be heard by this immense audience in the hall, as well as you listeners in your homes.
My dear friends of the Promenade Concerts, I cannot tell you how glad I am to be with you tonight, the last night of a remarkable 9-week season, which has seen this great hall filled to overflowing every night.
Well, I don't know whether you can hear me, ladies and gentlemen, over this terrific ovation, but if you can, I think you'll like to know that that last burst of cheering was because Sir Henry brought on his two associate conductors, one on either arm, Sir Adrian on his right, and Mr. Basil Cameron on his left. Now I'm going to let you hear the audience. Now, over this sound of tremendous applause and ovation and a very personal tribute to Sir Henry Wood, let us return you to the studio by way of this. Let us re-echo the sentiments that Sir Henry himself has uttered when he said, "It is a heartening thought to look forward to our meeting here for the first night of my 50th season of Promenade Concerts next year, with lights up, no blackout, to join in singing with full hearts, God Save the King."
we had to join the Home Guard. We were doing about, what, 3 or 4 nights a week, practicing and that. And they used to take us to Cockermouth in front of the inspector and that, say how you come on. It was happy and that, for there was always plenty of fun among yourselves and that, but you had to know what you were doing. Yeah. Aye.
I was in that procession with my pals of the 5th Battalion, County of London, as we fell in near the Marble Arch at 2 o'clock this afternoon. We knew it wasn't an ordinary parade, not like our usual in the quiet London streets with our old friend, the lecturer on the Sten gun, to follow. No, there was something much more exciting in the air. The old sweats among us were more than usually fussy. We had an extra polish on the brass of our weapon equipment, and when our commanding officer gave us the order, "Number 1 company, quick march," we went off with what I thought was almost a guard swagger, swinging past the gates of Hyde Park near Marble Arch and down towards Hyde Park Corner. Then as we came up towards the saluting base at Stanhope Gate, I saw the Royal Standard fluttering in the breeze, and we all knew we were marching past our Colonel-in-Chief, His Majesty the King.
The heart of London presents a really magnificent picture on this Sunday in May 1943. As if despite its battle scars, it's put on a dress equal to the occasion. We're here in Hyde Park with the tall trees wearing their first green coat of spring and looking down on the scene rich in colour. It's here at Stanhope Gate on a dais erected just in front of the Cavalry Memorial, whose white stone and bronze statue of St. George stand out conspicuously, that the Home Guard are being reviewed for the first time by their Colonel-in-Chief, His Majesty the King.
When the prisoners of war come to Cockermouth, or the Home Guard, they were called out all night, like to sit at certain spots to watch for these prisoners. It was harvest time, and you were working till about, 10 o'clock in field, and then you had to be on guard at, say, past. Well, you hadn't much time to get washed and into uniform and onto the... And you used to stop there till about 6:30 next morning, from 10 till 6:30. But we never seen any prisoners. They used to catch them at Carlisle. When you wanted labour, these prisoners used to come out. Well, a boy of 16, prisoner of war, and I says to him, I said, "What were you doing?" "Oh," I says, "we were trained a bit," he says, "and then we were put in a wagon and sent up to the front line." I says, "How long we were there?" "Oh," I says, "first day." Says, "as soon as I seen it," he says, "put my hands up," and that was the finish. He was taken prisoner. I says, "Was there many on you?" "Oh, yes," there were a lot of us. Aye, 16-year-old. Terrible. Aye, aye.
This side of the ocean, so dear of mine, I set them all.
Are we gonna win? Yeah! Do we like macaroni? No!
The time has come to deal the enemy a terrific blow in Western Europe. The blow will be struck by the combined sea, land, and air forces of the Allies, together constituting one great Allied team under the supreme command of General Eisenhower.
We came back to Gosport and ended up in an area called Alson, about a half a mile away from where the D-Day embarkations took place. my mother opened a cafe. It was a front room with a big urn of tea stewing there, a few rock cakes and spam sandwiches. One day we heard and saw a lot of military traffic. And my brother and I ran down to the main road and we saw a line of military traffic that went completely out of sight. And they were heading down the road to Hardway, where there was what we kids called the bunny, the ramp where we used to go fishing. And we saw all these vehicles and it went on for a couple of weeks, maybe more, and it was just blocked solid, and they would move just a few feet at a time, and sometimes they could hardly move at all. And I, running along the side of the lorries with mugs of tea. Now, they provided their own tin mugs, and I'd take them back to Mother, and Mother would top them up with tea, and then I'd take them back with a sandwich and a cake, and then they would give me some money. And it was their last purchase in this country, so they just emptied their pockets, gave it to us, and we went back.
We decided we would adopt a child. I was very much in love with my husband, and I was also very young and very lonely, and I so wanted a child that, because he was going away in the RAF, and so we decided we'd have this child, and we adopted her, and we brought her home when she was 10 days old. He was in the RAF, and I spent those last few days with him before he left after D-Day, and we spent all our time in Chichester Cathedral because we used to have our food and then sit there and keep cool, but we couldn't find anywhere to sleep. So he said, well, you better go to the Christian Young Women's, WWII. She said to me, oh, is this your husband? I said, yes, we've been married 2 years. And she said, oh, well, we can't have you apart. So she said, I know a lady who might be able to put you up. And we got there, and the lady said, well, she was awfully sorry, but she just hadn't got a room. But she said, there's a lady down the road, a Mrs. Townsend, and she has a daughter-in-law that nurses, and she may have the room empty. And they were simply the most wonderful people. They took us in for those few days, 3 days, and they were wonderful to us. And then that morning, my husband had to leave at 5 o'clock to get back. He had a mile's walk. And they got up and cooked him egg and bacon. And then I walked with him to the corner. And every time we said goodbye, because we kept running back. And then in the end, he said to me, well, when we kissed this time, you walk one way, me the other, and please don't look back.
This breed of men. What follows is a program for the English on St. George's Day. You're going to hear a number of English tunes and meet at the same time a number of English characters, fighting men in the services who at this very moment are standing by for action. We're going to take you into the minds of these men as they look backward or forward, and as their thoughts overlap with those of their comrades beside them or those of their friends at home. We present this breed of men.
George's Day. Sunday, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Good. Then we'll have a show. And you, Sergeant Major, I'm going to ask you to MC it.
Me, sir? But,
Why not, Sergeant Major? You are English, I take it?
English? Yes, sir. West Country, really.
Oh, good. Now, I want you to talk to the bandmaster and fix this whole thing up. And remember, we'll have guests from the Navy and the RAF and the Merchant Navy.
Yes, sir. Is it to be a kind of concert, sir?
Yes. And this year, it's got to be English. This year, if no other. And there's a point you must make from the platform.
A point, sir?
Yes, this year, if no other.
Oh, yes, sir. I see.
Of course you see. 1944, damn it. Think of your audience, man. Front-line troops, all of them. This may be their last show before they go overseas. Well, then, we'll give them a national show for the National Day. English through and through. No disrespect, of course, to the Scots and the rest.
Oh, no, sir. Of course not.
But just for once, 100% English. prove to ourselves that St. George is not a back number yet. I may be old-fashioned, Sergeant Major, but I still think England means something.
My father was a very active, very lively man. As soon as the Home Guard was formed, first of all it was called the Local Defence Volunteers, and then the Home Guard. And as soon as that was formed, he became very active in it and was quite highly regarded, became a captain in the Home Guard. He went up to London to work in the office each day, and I went down to school. And the bus that I caught in the morning, sometimes I would see him standing on the opposite corner, waiting for a bus to take him to the underground station. And on this particular morning in June, in 1944, end of June, after D-Day, I saw him standing there, and the thought just flitted through my mind so quickly that I hardly registered it. And I thought to myself, that's the last time I'm going to see you. I hardly made an impact, and yet somewhere in me, I knew that. And that night, we waited for him to come home, and we waited, and we waited, and we waited. And of course, he never came home, because there had been this B-1, this doodlebug, which had landed outside his office building.
Showgirls were allowed to join ENSA, which was an entertainment service for the troops. And I was called up, and I was put with another girl as a double song and dance act. And off we go, all around this country, first of all. A welfare lady came down from Drury Lane. She took us out to Barham Court outside Canterbury, where they were turning a house into an ENSA hostel. They took these big country houses, so many empty places, and they made them into hostels for us. And she got us all there, and she took all our measurements, went out with one of the older women in the company, and she bought us 3 of everything. And then a big lorry came down from Drury Lane with skips full of clothes, props, costumes, the tap mat, and we worked the following night at Dover. And we had to go in the afternoon for an afternoon show. While we were there, the siren went, and they started shelling us from across the channel. And they broadcast over the tannoy speakers to the troops saying, "We're all please put your tin hats on. We think we're pretty safe here, but there might be some shrapnel flying around." So all these fellas, they fumbled under their seats, got their tin hats, stuck them on their heads, and nobody took a blind bit of notice of us dancing about on the stage. And we played in the Orkneys, played actually on the ships, the big ones. And although they were anchored at harbour there, the ships were going to list on them, so it was really hard. We sort of slid down one side and sort of had to climb back the other while we were dancing. But we had a lady accordionist in the show, and she had this accordion strapped to her chest, and both her hands were occupied. So it was very, very difficult for her. And as the ship listed one way, she sort of careered down one way, and we waited at the side and gave a little nudge, and she reeled back the other way. Sure enough, the news came out that D-Day had happened. And we were one of the first lot to go over there. And we actually drove through a battleground, and they'd buried the people where they'd fallen. And on one place there was a German helmet, and another one was a British helmet. But we actually went up to the front line. We followed the troops through Belgium and Holland was one of the worst places for losing everything. It looked as if a giant hoover had gone over the land.
This is Audrey Russell on Saturday, the 30th of September, speaking from Folkestone. We've just driven down to this town to see what celebrations are going on now that the people know that the Channel guns are captured. An aircraft has just gone overhead as I speak. The announcement of the capture of the guns was made so suddenly this morning that as far as I can see, no one's had time to put out any flags or banners yet. And the mood of the people isn't one of celebration anyway. I'm sitting on the churchyard wall of the old parish church overlooking the Channel. The parish church of St. Mary's and St. Eanswyth's. Tonight from the tower, the flag of St. George, red cross on a white ground, flutters from the tower. I've watched the people going into church for the Thanksgiving service, which was arranged at short notice. The service is going on now. Maybe you can hear the people singing a hymn. I watched them walk to church, and they had quiet, unsmiling faces. But there was a serenity there that I haven't seen for a very long time. This night, the first night when they know that they may be free of shelling, their mood is one of thanksgiving. The celebrations will come afterwards. Listen to them singing a hymn.
When the war first started, I was touring, like every other dancer, in touring review. Being on tour, we couldn't register with people, so we got what they called emergency rations. So we used to troll up each week to the local greengrocers and say, can we have our egg, please? Because you got one egg a week. That was the ration. And the answer you always got was, we haven't got enough for our own. And the landladies were just the same. They'd sometimes say, oh, we couldn't get you your cheese ration this week. There's very little in the town. And if you grumbled, they say, well, the terrible phrase, don't you know there's a war on, as if we didn't know. And of course, the Ministry of Information, they were always sending out instructions. And if you went to the pictures were a big feature programme, a B feature, cartoons, news, Pathy Gazette, and then would come on the Ministry of Information. There was a funny little elderly man at the board head. He used to come out and he said, now when you open your tea packet and you put your tea out, that's not the end of it. You open up the bottom and out comes almost a half spoonful more, and the butter paper, you had to scrape the butter off the paper. But worst of all was Walton pie. The Minister for Food was Lord Walton, and he always came up with some ghastly recipe. And he said, now you don't have to have meat and you don't have to have fish. This is a wonderful pie. I've called it after myself, Walton pie. So it had parsnips in it and carrots, turnips, potatoes, onions, nearly all root vegetables. And I only had the misfortune to have it once, and I was doubled up with the wind all night.
Lord Walton. Good evening. As you have just heard, it is to you, the housewives of Britain, that I want to talk tonight. We have a job to do together, you and I, an immensely important war job. No uniforms, no parades, no drills, but a job wanting a lot of thinking and a lot of knowledge too. We are the army that guards the kitchen front in this war. I want you to think just for one moment about the future. There may be difficult days ahead of us, far more difficult than we've seen yet. We shall still need feeding, and my job is to arrange that there shall be such quantities of food held in reserves in different parts of this country that in the worst days that we can imagine, you will have enough food.
I started work in 1943 when I was 14. Well, then I really began to have a social life. I used to go dancing. You used to go to the pictures, the cinema. Under 14, we used to stand outside and you'd go up to people and say, please, will you take me in? And you'd give them the money and they'd take you in with them, and once you got in there, you was on your own. But we did used to go dancing a lot. And I had boyfriends that I went to the pictures with. I had boyfriends that I went dancing with. But it was all friendly. Nothing sexual or anything like that at all. I met a soldier and he was stationed in Stoke Newington. He was Scotch. And he asked to take me out. And I said, well, I don't really want to. But he said, well, let's, all of us meet. So 3 girls, 3 fellas, we met outside and we paid for ourselves to go in. And then he came round a couple of times to where I lived, because my mum always said, tell your boyfriends to come and knock for you so we can see them. And he came round once and he said he was going on leave to Scotland, so I thought, well, that's good. And he said, but I'll be back. Well, when he came back, he said, I've got an engagement ring. I said, oh, no. I said, I don't want to get engaged. He said, but that cost me 15 shillings, that ring. But my mum had managed to queue up for some oranges, and he ate the oranges. My mum said, he's ate all those oranges.
And now for our special discussion program for young people, To Start You Talking. Here is Douglas Allen.
Good evening, everybody.
Tonight, the young people here in the studio are going to give their views to the radio doctor on what they feel should be given, or perhaps should have been given, in the way of sex instruction. There's a real crowd of them here, by the way. We felt for a subject like this it was better than just having one or two, so don't bother if you can't tell who's who. It doesn't really matter. Some of them are still in the sixth forms of secondary schools, but most of them are out and about at work. They're all between 16 and 19. Well, now I'll hand over to you, Doctor. Will you carry on, please?
Righto. I think perhaps the quickest way to get our bearings is to find out how you got hold of what little or much you know about sex. Now, Colette, you're one of the oldest, I think. Will you start the ball rolling?
Well, actually, my mother told me when I was pretty young. I just asked her questions as they cropped up, as I heard them. I think parents should tell you.
I was working full-time at 14. I was a girl, so I was just going to leave school, meet a boy, get married and have children. Started to go ballroom dancing then when I was about 15 with some friends who I used to work with, and I loved dancing. So I used to get the good dancers, so that got me into boys. But I didn't get to have a boyfriend as such as the other girls did at that age, because the last waltz is when a boy has to take you home. And I was never allowed to stay till the last waltz, because I had to be home for 11, which meant I had to miss out on the last waltz, dash for the last train, and get home for 11. And that's when all the boys used to ask you for a date, but I wasn't allowed to do that. And woe betide me if I was ever late. She got worried then about me going into town. Stay away from those Americans. Like they were just ready to give you a baby and then carry on with the job of helping the war. But there was the fascination with them being oversexed, overpaid and over here. As they got settled into their barracks, they used to send a passion wagon on a Saturday night, because the authorities used to put this on for them. They'd take all the girls back to the dance hall at Warrington for a bit of rest and relaxation for them and a dance. I couldn't go. I'd got to stay and dance with the little English boys.
We arrived in Liverpool, were put on trains and shunted to Dorset. We arrived in Dorset at Dorchester, put on lorries and sent into various villages around Dorset. I was sent to Puddletown. And immediately we arrived, we were given leave. That was November the 29th. We were given passes to come in to Weymouth or wherever anybody wants to go. So most of them went to London. But a pal and I decided to come into Weymouth on the 30th. And on the 30th, we were wandering around in the evening, wondering where to go. Where are the forces clubs, we wondered. We were looking for an American Services Club, but of course we were the first Americans in Weymouth, as far as we knew. And we came to this place where we heard voices and it was all blacked out. So we pulled back the curtain, went in, and it was a British Service Club. We were the only two GIs there. That's where I met Mary, my wife, on that first day in Weymouth. Mary and her mother were serving teas and buns behind a counter, and we spent the evening in the club and were invited up by Mary's mother to tea on the Sunday, which was the next day. Mary was the first British girl I met and eventually married. And we were engaged in March and married in May, 3 weeks before D-Day.
We got engaged in March. There was this ruling on the part of the American forces that there had to be a 2-month waiting period between getting engaged and getting married. And during this time, one of the senior officers really did his best to put me off. And the padre had gone and talked to my boyfriend. And I was a right stubborn Yorkshire lass. And I'd met the boy I wanted to marry, and that was it.
As a great year ends, tonight we look back on a year of great achievement, the year of invasion, the year of liberation, a year of supreme effort and of supreme sacrifice. Before we pass in review this astonishing 1944 and join our friends at home and abroad to greet the year which succeeds it, let us listen to some verses written 100 years ago, yet tonight very appropriate. In Memoriam, written by a great poet, Alfred Tennyson, is a poem of bereavement and of faith, of personal loss and of spiritual courage. Its author was looking both back and forward. For us, who tonight do the same, his words remain an inspiration. The poem is spoken by Robert Donat.
I envy not in any moods the captive, void of noble rage, the linnet born within the cage that never knew the summer woods. I envy not the beast that takes his license in the field of time, unfettered by the sense of crime, to whom a conscience never wakes, nor what may count itself as blessed, the heart that never plighted troth, but stagnates in the weeds of sloth, nor any want begotten rest. I hold it true, whate'er befall. I feel it when I sorrow most. 'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all.
I was at work and I was earning money, which for the first time gave me some degree of independence, and we used to go dancing and the cinema. We lived our teenage life as best we could, as interesting as we could.
We went to a Swiss dancing school. That's where I met Dennis. We were both 15 and we used to like to partner each other. Sometimes we used to go perhaps twice a week. From then on, we used to go out for a walk or go to the pictures, and it developed from there. And that was in Camden Town in London. I lived in Hampstead, and we lived in a house which was bombed, and then we had to move again to Maitland Park near Belsize Park. That's where Dennis used to come and meet me and pick me up, and we go for walks on Hampstead Heath and so on. Very romantic. Not worrying about the bombs, really.
Clothes certainly were of interest to me, because there was a shop in Charing Cross Road called Cecil G, which had all the American style stuff, and another one was called David Arnold. And between the two of those, they used to have some magical stuff, and somehow or the other I managed to get some of the latest gear.
I've always liked clothes. I was only earning 23 shillings. I started work on. My mother used to have a pound, and I had the 3 shillings. And I did miracles on 3 shillings.
As many of you know, Glenn Miller, now Major Glenn Miller, is here just now as conductor of the American band of the Allied Expeditionary Force. And that's a bit of luck for the wishing well. And for you, Jeff, Rodney and Rocky in East Africa. Because Glenn has come along specially today to meet you.
I was lucky enough to get a ticket to a BBC recording of the Glenn Miller band. He came out on stage prior to the broadcast and said he's going to try a little tune that he thought we'd like. And he played Little Brown Jug. I still remember the words when they introduced the programme. It was, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is the American band of the AEF under the specific direction of Major Glenn Miller." And here he is. They started Moonlight Serenade then, and played all the great songs.
Thank you, Vernon, and hello to all you guys and gals on the All-Allied Fighting Team. I'd like to put that hello into capital letters to the three gentlemen who invited me here, Jeff, Rodney, and Rocky.
I'm sure that many of the forces who are listening, as well as Jeff and Rodney and Rocky, will paste this moment well into their memory books, Major Miller.
Take it easy now, Vernon.
And now, how about bouncing a few answers back at the questions that have been bowling in about you and your American band of the AEF?
Well, you start asking, we'll do our best.
Well, I think first we should start right from the beginning of your visit to this country. Now, how long have you been over here?
Just about 3 months, but in those 90-odd days, it seems like we've lived a lifetime of really wonderful experiences.
It sounds as if you've been kept busy every moment.
Well, the flak has been a little heavy at times, and this might give you a rough idea of what it's been like. In the month of August, for instance, we played 89 separate jobs. That includes 35 concerts at the bases and camps, as well as maintaining our regular broadcasting schedule.
I shouldn't think there's much time left for eating and sleeping.
Well, sometimes there isn't.
Rumor has it, Glenn, that you and your boys will soon be going overseas.
The sooner we have it, Vernon, the better we'll like it.
Now, have you enjoyed being here? I mean, in the few moments you found outside work?
The real enjoyment comes from the moments inside our work. Once we heard the happy sound of a music-hungry bunch of servicemen yelling for more whatever we had to offer, we knew that we could never enjoy a more satisfying payoff in our lives.
I can understand that.
It's really been a great kick. Not only that, but we've had the pleasure of playing with such fine British artists and new friends like Vera Lynn, Ann Shelton, Paula Green, many others.
I'd got into King's College. The first year of my university, which was 44-45, there were very few men students about. There were people maybe who'd been invalided out of the forces earlier. And on the whole, there was remarkably little effect of the war on a university. People were carrying on, they knew they had to. There was rationing, so there was very little in the way of what you would expect from a university refectory. You'd go out to what is called a British restaurant, you know, with the really sort of basic stuff, the spam and the whale meat and the root vegetables all cut up.
My sister became ill. We shared a bedroom, and I felt her in the night, very hot, very feverish. So I talked to my school teacher in Buxton, because there weren't many evacuees at our school, and so the few that were, the teachers helped them along and were very kind to them. And I spoke to this particular teacher, and I said, I think my sister's ill. And she said, well, there's scarlet fever going about at the moment, and we've had a few cases from this school. And I went home and I told Auntie Fraser that I thought my sister had scarlet fever. And within the hour, she got the doctor, and the doctor had whistled her off in an ambulance. An army ambulance, incidentally, because there were no others about. And she was taken into the sanatorium, and these people in white coats and gloves and masks came into the house and stripped the bed, and everything was thrown through the window into the backyard, and the house was fumigated and the bed was burned, and all the drawers were sprayed. Your clothes smelt of this, it wasn't nice disinfectant smell, it was like gas. And my mother and my father came over from Manchester, but weren't allowed to see her. You saw her behind glass, and all you could see were these kiddies playing around in this room that was totally barred, and the windows were barred so the children wouldn't get out and spread the disease.
Such a lot of teasing on the sick parade. My temperature's increasing, I'm very much afraid. Oh, what a silly chap I've been. I didn't take my master cream. And now I've got malaria. Malaria's got me now. I went in a very rocky place. Samba nella Ferne und Städtchen auf der Hof. So wollen wir da uns wiedersehen bei der Laterne wollen wir stehen, wie einst Lili Marleen. Wie einst Lili Marleen.
Hello, WHN in New York City. This is Juan McAlpin greeting you from a BBC studio in London. Well, folks, the blackout in Britain has been relieved. Or anyway, that's what they tell us. From what I hear, you'd have been put right on that point if you'd been in London last night. Now, we always knew that the lights were not going to shine forth just as people wanted them to with this change in the blackout regulations. We knew the lights wouldn't go up in the streets fully. In fact, there wasn't to be any change at all immediately in London street lighting. The only change was that you could get by with using opaque curtains instead of the usual heavy light-proof blackout curtains or other various makeshift devices which some of us have been wrestling with every night for 5 years and 2 weeks. The only definite stipulation was that objects could not be seen inside the room. Well, this was something, and we did think that after all this time we were at least going to see some friendly glows from London windows. I wasn't in London last night, but some of my friends went all over the place to track down one of those friendly glows, just one of them, and they had no luck. For one thing, the air raid siren sounded just after blackout time, and anyone who had been rash enough to go in for the new system of window curtaining would have heard a shout from a passing air raid board and put out that light.
Unsere beiden Schatten sahen wie einer aus, dass wir so rief und passten, das sah man gleich daraus. Und alle Leute sollen es sehen, wenn wir bei der Laterne stehen, wie einst Lili Marleen, wie einst Lili Marleen.
One of the things that kept us going were the speeches which Churchill gave, which were inspirational. The words kept going round in your mind long after he'd said them, and they gave you the incentive to carry on.
Rief der Posten, die blasen tapfen frei. Es kann 3 Tage kosten, Kamerad, ich komm ja gleich. Da sagten wir auf Wiedersehen, wie gerne wollt ich mit dir gehen, mit dir, Lili Marleen, mit dir, Lili Marleen.
I was 10 when it started and I was a month short of 16 when it finished. And had I reached 16, if the war was still been on, I would have been called up. I could have gone and done war work or in the land army or whatever, you know, or in the forces, I don't know. But I wasn't particularly looking forward to that. But as it happened, war was over in the May, I was 16 in the June. I was a child when the war started, and I was a woman when it finished. Because I'd been through such a lot, I'd seen a lot, and you grew up. You grew up very quickly. I'm proud that I did go through the war, and there was a terrific spirit amongst everybody. Pity that it takes a war to get that spirit.
Deine Schritte kennt sie, deinen schieren Gang. Alle Abend brennt sie, doch nicht vergaß sie lang. Und sollte mir ein Leid geschehen, wer wird bei der Laterne stehen? Mit dir, Lili Marleen, mit dir, Lili Marleen. Aus dem stillen Raume, aus der Erde Grund, hebt mich wie im Traume dein verliebter Mund. Wenn sich die späten Nebel drehen, werd ich bei der Laterne stehen, wie einst Lili Marleen, wie einst Lili Marleen.
This is the BBC Home Service. Here is the news. No statement has been made about the Prime Minister's VE Day broadcast. No announcement has yet been made by SHAFE about the cessation of hostilities, but unconfirmed reports from correspondents say that the unconditional surrender of Germany to the Western Allies and Russia was signed in the early hours of this morning.
At the end of the war, as the war was coming to a close, we all sat round the radio and we listened to Churchill's speeches and we listened to all the other things that were going on, and I found that boring. All I could understand was what I could see, what I could hear, and what I could feel. You knew people who lost their parents. We had a boy that lived with us who'd lost his mother, and you accepted it and you survived. And for me, the most unrewarding part of the war was actually being evacuated. I wanted to get back to Gosport. I wanted to get back to where my friends were, where it was all happening.
During the first few moments of this bulletin, the war in Europe is coming to its official end. 1 minute past midnight is the time fixed for the cessation of hostilities.
I was in work, and we had a very, very strict forelady. Even though the war was on, we could not wear slacks for work or turbans or anything like that. And she said that we was going to be given a day off, for VE Day. And of course, I mean, a cheer went up, as you can imagine. I didn't really spend it with my mum and dad. I spent it with friends, because there was a whole crowd of us, fellas and girls, and it was funny really, because we went round to quite a lot of pubs, but I couldn't go in because I was underage. So we just had to stand outside the pubs and sing and that, and then we went on to another one, but we couldn't go in. But it was a terrific feeling of thank God it's over. Although we still had the Japanese war, but we knew that we weren't going to have any more bombs.
This is London. The Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Winston Churchill.
Yesterday morning at 2:41 a.m. at General Eisenhower's headquarters, General Jodl, the representative of the German High Command, and of Grand Admiral Dönitz, the designated head of the German state, signed the act of unconditional surrender of all German land, sea, and air forces in Europe to the Allied Expeditionary Force.
The end of the war in Europe was officially announced by Mr. Churchill at 3 o'clock this afternoon in a broadcast from 10 Downing Street. He said,
This is a solemn but a glorious hour.
I only wish that Franklin D. Roosevelt had lived to witness this day. General Eisenhower informs me that the forces of Germany have surrendered to the United Nations. The flags of freedom fly all over Europe.
Day, the war ended in the morning of the 8th of May 1945, and we went onto the promenade at night, and all the bonfires were alight all the way along the shore, blazing up into the sky. People had brought pianos out onto the pavements, people were singing, dancing. They were ripping up the seats from the promenade at Blackpool and throwing them onto the bonfires to keep them going, and the police never said a word. All the seats went from the promenade at Blackpool to keep the fires going, which burnt all night. It was the contrast between the dark years of the war, the total blackness, to these almost like beacons of hope. We just walked around, everybody did, singing and dancing. If there was a pub with any beer or with any drinks at all, we went in there and celebrated, and we just went completely mad with pleasure and joy and triumph because we'd finally won the war.
Now Mr. Churchill stands on the balcony of the Ministry of Health. He's wearing his boiler suit, the famous boiler suit that he's made so wonderful. And he had the audacity, shall I say, to put on his head his famous black hat. Nobody can say that it goes with the boiler suit, but you heard what a cheer it raised from the crowd. He stands now in the floodlights, the band playing for He's a Jolly Good Fellow, and he's giving the victory sign for all his might from the flooded balcony. I had no idea when I began speaking to you a moment ago that Mr. Churchill was coming out again. But there he is, standing, waving to the crowd, with his naval ADC behind him, and the people of the Ministry of Health crowded on each side of him, smiling. And now listen, the band is playing Land of Hope and Glory, and the crowd is singing. And this suddenly has become a very moving moment, for Mr. Churchill too is singing, and he is conducting the singing of this song. Will you listen, please?
Hear, first of all, the victory peals that are ringing now from York Minster.
There was great celebrations that day because everyone was shouting it and saying it in the street. It's VE Day. And so we all decided we've got to go and have a drink to celebrate. And we just walked down to the nearest pub. We went inside. Oh, and it was filled with people drinking and having drinks and all singing. And there was a great load lifted of our minds. All the bombing and all the bad times were over.
This is Edinburgh, the capital of Scotland and one of the loveliest cities anywhere. In spite of the drab drizzle that has been going on all day, even that, it's not enough to damp the Scottish spirit. Oh, there go the pipes. Of course, it wouldn't be complete without that. There they are, not very far from me, just down below now. It's the pipe band of the Edinburgh University Senior Training Corps, looking very brave indeed in their dress McFarlane tartans, drummers and blackbox.
Where, before the day is out, the greatest crowd of all will collect. Howard Marshall describes the scene outside Buckingham Palace.
A very great crowd is collected already. Thousands upon thousands of people gathered to share this historic day with the King and Queen. Royal standards floating over the palace, and just now Her Majesties the King and Queen, Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret Rose, have gone in from the royal balcony where they receive the cheers of the crowd following the Prime Minister's historic announcement. The entire space, the whole roadway, the whole pavement and the whole scene is one dense mass of people in the gayest colours, red, white and blue rosettes, red, white and blue hats, streamers, flags. The Queen Victoria Memorial is covered with people. A land girl sitting on the bronze lions, a wren standing up behind her, flags up above the heads of the crowd everywhere. There have been soldiers, sailors, airmen of every nationality. I've seen Canadians, New Zealanders, Americans in jeeps covered with flags. I've even seen a Russian soldier forcing his way through this
In the course of the afternoon, some friends gathered together and went to London, and we all gravitated towards Buckingham Palace. And it was rather frightening in a sense. I mean, there was this tremendous feeling, but I was caught up in that great rush which happened when the royal family appeared on the balcony, and there was this tremendous rush forward. And then afterwards, more and more and more people were trying to get into this space in front, and you were taken off your feet, quite literally, and carried along, and that was really frightening. But there was this tremendous sense, it was unforgettable in that way.
The decorations of Belfast have been something very exciting, particularly in the small streets at the back. The small little streets have done themselves particularly proud, and some of the colour schemes and some of the care that has gone into them is very moving and exciting. Well, there it is, cheers, tears, laughter, and a feeling of kinship with all the other cities of the United Kingdom that have worked and suffered and come through with their tails up. That's Belfast today. And that's
the BBC Home Service. Wittmar! Yes, it's that man again! It's that man again, yes, that man again, yes, the Tommy and it's here.
Calling all cars, keep a sharp lookout for some good characters.
Look, boss, there's someone coming in under a white flag. Shall I show him in?
No, I'll do a Monty on him. Let him wait.
I protest. I declare.
But it's April Lagueur.
Oh, but spur my grey hair.
That's all fun and no fur. Give me that trumpet. I'll show you how to blow it.
Take cover, boss.
Oh, don't worry, Sam. It's Pat's going home.
When trouble's brewing, it's his doing, that man again.
And as the crowd has gathered and seen the royal family appear upon the balcony of the palace, the bells of Westminster Abbey, across St. James's Park and Parliament Square, are sounding their victory peals.
The procession now, crawling along at half a mile an hour, has just got by the corner of the bottom buildings of Whitehall. I'm looking
from the last building but one opposite the Ministry of Health out over Parliament Square. And it's gone into the main gates of the House of Commons, where presently a procession of the government, members and officials of the House, led by the Speaker, are coming across the square again into the little church of St. Margaret's for a service of thanksgiving. And now the crowd is just beginning to relax faintly. But still in Parliament Square, where we had this unexpected excitement of Mr. Churchill appearing, it's gathered as thickly and as tightly packed as ever. To say that this is a kaleidoscope of people and colour is not really to use a trite phrase. I have never seen so many colours in one place. Perhaps the coming of summer quite suddenly today has brought out all the summer dresses. And the people who, 20 minutes ago, when Mr. Churchill was speaking, stood in absolute silence in Whitehall, facing the loudspeakers on the front of the Ministry of Health, now, having heard him say that they may rejoice, are beginning to rejoice.
We went up to Grange in Borrowdale, to the Borrowdale Arms, and had a celebration there. And there was a boy, he was a sailor, I think he was in the Norwegian Navy, and he had managed to take sanctuary in this country, and he'd made his way to Keswick, and they were wonderful at this hotel. On the shores of the lake there was a sort of a croft, and they let him live in that, made that his little home. And when this great day came, he'd got his flag with him, and he put it up. And he took Hitler off absolutely perfectly. He got black straight hair, which he pulled it down, and he made some kind of a moustache. And unknown to us, he had a false tooth, which he took out, you see, and he jumped on the table and was taking Hitler off. Well, of course, to us, it was just hilarious after all the tensions that we had. And we all lined up and crossed the road, and we danced the Pally Glide down the road.
Here in Cardiff, during the early afternoon, the people were walking up Duke Street, St. Mary's Street, Queen Street, past the battlemented walls of the castle, over the Glamorgan Canal, the canal which in the old days used to bring up the coal barges from the Glamorgan valleys, the coal which transformed Cardiff within 50 years from a little fishing village into the great port and city which it is today. They walked along Kingsway, all in one, moving in one direction, and that was towards Cathays Park, which is the very heart of the city, the civic centre itself. It was here that the great ones stood in their time, our present King and Queen, Edward VII, Edward VIII and George V. It was here too that almost 4 years to the day that our Prime Minister Winston Churchill stood in the spring of 1941, giving the V sign to the crowd assembled to cheer and welcome him as he reviewed the civil defence.
Well, after all that, we're going to finish our victory show tonight with a special arrangement by Cecil Woods with Ian Blair as the soloist of the Army, the Navy and the Air Force.
There's music on the air, there's shouting everywhere as the boys go marching by.
Greetings and victory salutations from the city and port of Liverpool. Here at this famous meeting place of ships from all over the world, the 2.5 million people who live on Merseyside are celebrating the long-awaited VE Day. Listen to this voice of Liverpool.
For a few moments, we bring you the sound that's floating out from a village church over the quiet of a Dorset valley. They're the bells that are ringing from the ancient square tower of St. Mary's, Puddletown.
Victory celebrated.
And well may London rejoice. Many of those faces now, smiling and laughing, have worn stern expressions and anxious looks often enough as their wearers in the uniform of the Civil Defence or the Special Constabulary or the Home Guard, or perhaps even just as fire guards. And I'm sure there are quite a lot of people in this mass of Londoners down here below me at the moment who are reliving those days and nights when they paused for a moment in their task to lift a steel helmet and wipe the sweat off a grimy forehead, remembering that almost 5 years ago to the day Mr. Churchill offered nothing but blood, toil, tears and sweat. And now these citizens in the heart of the empire, they rejoice at a job well done. And that, as Mr. Churchill said in 1940, when London was subjected to all those air raids, that they have proved to the fighting forces that behind them, in this capital city, is a people who will not flinch or weary of the struggle, hard and protracted though it will be.
I hadn't taken on board that the war was over, and we didn't know that everything was going to come to an end, things were going to change, that there wasn't going to be any more air raids, and that houses weren't going to be demolished, and that schools were going to go back to normality.
It was about 10 o'clock at night, and someone in the distance shouted, "It's over, it's over." We all ran out of the King George Club, which was nearly in Piccadilly, and all we could see in Piccadilly were lights going on. I mean, we hadn't seen a light for 6 years. There was lights going on, there was music, there was terrible noise, and people just came from nowhere. And they were dancing, and this was the end of the war, you know. And you had to take a breath to say, well, what's it all been about? What is this 6.5 years been for?